touch about this big story, the fact that 40% of those people who are coming to this country on those dinghies are not actually seeking asylum. They're from Albania. Albania is not a war-torn country. Albania is waiting for accession to the European Union, and Albania is also a NATO member. Many of you very, very angry. Interestingly, Neil Eastall says that I and TalkTV are now talking about the invasion of thugs and fake refugees from Albania, and not a mention on BBC Breakfast, not a mention on Sky News. That's why you have to watch TalkTV to get the real news. I'm continue to be joined by Vincent Moss, who is former political editor at the Sunday Mirror, and Reem Ibrahim is also here as well. What's your next story?
I think the Observer front page gets into the Conservative leadership contest, but it uses Gordon Brown to do that, the former Prime Minister. He is saying there must be an emergency budget or we risk a winter of dire poverty. And in particular, he's saying that more than 4 million households are on course to spend at least a quarter of their net income on energy. And this is with the latest predictions of being even higher than £3,000, potentially even going as high as £4,500 that people might be spending on fuel this winter. So it's a very dire warning. There seems to be an increasing momentum, I think, for an emergency budget. Liz Truss is saying that. So I think we probably are going to see one. The only question is what's going to be in it.
And Reem, you were just saying in terms of this, Liz Truss has said about the timings, if there was an emergency budget.
Yeah, and she also said that she would sort of temporarily release the green cap levy as well on energy bills, which will hopefully support it. I mean, look, when it comes to things like VAT, the people that are hit hardest are the poorest, right?
Indeed.
Because that, they can see the immediate impact in their prices, and so I think it's really welcome that Liz Truss is hopefully going to fix this.
But also, I thought there was clever thinking. The fact is, she said actually we could have an emergency budget next month, and they would implement those tax cuts there and then instead of waiting for April. Rishi Sunak seems to be saying something different, doesn't he?
Yes, there does seem to be a difference between the two candidates. Rishi Sunak is not ruling out further handouts, if you put it that way, in terms of benefits, giving people further cuts. Now, Liz Truss is saying that she wouldn't do it, that she would achieve what she thinks will help avoid recession by implementing tax cuts quicker, faster and deeper. And Rishi Sunak has a different view, so there is that conflict.
But what's your view on that? Because, of course, Rishi Sunak is saying, actually, we need to balance the books, and now he's saying we need to give more handouts. That's a non sequitur.
Yeah, the truth is we don't know which is the best way of solving this problem. I mean, because you can't run a control experiment. They both have different views, and we will never actually know whether the other one was right, if you see what I mean. So, I mean, personally, the most important thing I would have thought is getting inflation under control. That has to happen. It's predicted to hit 13%, and it's a question of how you do that. And there are differing opinions on how you do that, particularly among the two.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's a cost-push inflation. So many economists are saying, well, actually, putting up interest rates does not actually address inflation. Others seem to tell me that it does. Now, I'm no economist and I have no idea, but it would seem to me that the Bank of England has been woefully neglectful in its duty. I would have thought it should have acted faster.
Definitely. I mean, I think there's a strong case for the Bank of England to have acted faster, but I'm not too keen on this agenda that it's all the bank's fault. At the end of the day, the politicians are in charge, and as you said, a lot of these politicians are away at the moment. We are facing a huge economic crisis, and the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are nowhere to be seen. There is an argument, of course, they're only in post for not very long, so what can they do? Well, I would say they should be doing the job they're paid for, and I think people would like to see them at least active here and trying to map out the start of solutions, because it's a huge crisis coming down the tracks, and I think people are very worried about it, and they're not seeing the reassurance they expect from politicians, and it's a bit easy to blame it all on the Bank of England government.
I would agree.
I think I completely agree that obviously the politicians have to keep the Bank of England in check, and that's completely right, but also the Bank of England control the money supply. They've been printing money over lockdown and handing it out like sweets, right? So it's and handing it like sweets to children. I think it's really quite sad that the Bank of England have this sort of monopoly over money. That's neither here nor there. I think that the primary issue now is obviously controlling the inflation. I completely agree with that. How do we do that? Well, I mean, Liz Truss has just recently announced that she would support the Bank of England now targeting NGDP, which would then mean that the money supply is controlled as the economy contracts and as the economy grows. So that's sort of allowing the money supply to follow the amount of goods and services that we're providing in the economy. That will help control inflation.
Right. So in the Times, Sunak is pledging billions more. That feeds into exactly what you've just been saying. But how does he plan to do that?
Well, I mean, he's not really. I don't think he's being super specific. He's not. He's talking about potentially giving away more money in terms of more support, because the support's quite limited at the moment. But again, there's no sort of huge detail on that. He's just saying that he wouldn't rule out further direct support. It says in the Sunday Times here for households this winter, amid fears the price cap and energy bills could reach 4,400.
It's so nebulous, isn't it? How are you going to vote on that? We might give it. We have no detail on how we'll give it. That doesn't seem to me to be a tangible policy.
Oh, that's right. I mean, he talks about other things that are important, but not what people are focused on at the moment. So he talks, for example, about shaking up A-levels and creating new free schools and staying in politics and all the rest of it. But the huge crisis is all about the economy and fixing the economy. And both the candidates are coming up with lots of different policies in lots of different areas, but they're skirting around the key issue we all want to know about, which is how are you going to fix the economy?
Yes, I couldn't agree more.
No, absolutely. I think he's so wishy-washy and flip-floppy in all of his policy. They don't even know what he stands for anymore, other than spending more, apparently.
I thought you hadn't decided. You can't then say, yes, I'm behind Liz Truss. You told me you hadn't decided.
I am behind Liz Truss, but I'm sceptical. I want to hear them speak first. I'm trying to be
so he could turn it round for you?
If he becomes a Conservative, then yes, I will vote for him. But so far, I've not seen that. And I'm almost 100% certain I will be voting for Liz Truss.
Well, that's changed, because
anyway.
at the beginning of this programme, you were not 100%.
Well, I want to see them speak first. We'll see what happens.
You're very lucky to be one of the 110,000 people who voted this contest. I think you see different figures. I mean, some people say it's 160,000, some people say it's about 110,000 members. For the rest of us who haven't got a vote in this, I feel a bit I think we're all a bit disenfranchised, because it's a huge issue who becomes the next Prime Minister, and yet the selectorate is incredibly small, isn't it?
Yeah, and as a former political editor, what's your view on the fact that it's taking so long? It's very much in the public eye. If only 110,000 can vote, why are the rest of us being subjected to this?
Absolutely, and I think what you will see after we see the winner crowned on September the 5th is pressure at some point for a general election, because everybody else will be, hang on, we didn't vote for this. You need a mandate for what you're going to do. Let's have an election. Now, I would imagine whoever wins will not want to do that, because it's a terrible time to be having an election in early 2023.
And already got an 80-seat majority. They don't want to get rid of that.
Absolutely. So they will fight not to have an election until things improve. But there will be many people out there saying, hang on, we didn't vote for any of this. You're planning some really big things. Let's have an election. So that's another world of pain coming down the track for whoever wins the contest.
Yes. Let's move to your next story in the Telegraph. This is about the hosepipe ban.
Yeah, I think this is really significant because we're obviously looking at about 10 days of more sunny weather with no rain, and the Environment Secretary, George Eustace, here is saying that they've already seen a couple of water companies impose hosepipe bans, I think most notably in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. He wants to see that going further and more companies imposing hosepipe bans, because there is just a real fear of drought. And it's not just the drought and the dry grass and the dry lawns. I think people are now really worried about the risk of wildfires, and we've seen a few of those in London and other places.
The barbecues.
Absolutely, and the temporary barbecues. So it's a really important story, especially at a time when there's just no prospect of rain or weather getting any better.
It's the driest spell since 1976, and apparently it's driest on record for the southeast and the east.
It certainly feels that way. I mean, I'm old enough.
It really does.
But I'm old enough to remember 1976, and that was pretty hot, and this feels at least as hot. So.
Yes, I remember it too. You don't, Reem.
I don't. I was born much later.
I know that. I mean, it goes back. I've been talking about this all week. What are the water companies doing? It feels, again, they're taking all the profits. They're not reinvesting. We heard about the desalination plant in Beckton, which isn't working. And we're an island. We're surrounded by water. The whole thing is extraordinary to me.
I think there's a huge problem with the water companies. There's a great campaigner from Undertones Leasing, a Fergal Sharkey, who makes a lot of points about this, about how our rivers are drying up, how the water company bosses are getting huge profits, how huge dividends are being paid out, how there's still sewage in the rivers and there's sewage in the sea, and they're not doing enough to tackle it. And I think this is one of the great, if we didn't have so many other things on our plates, I think this would be a real top of the news story about how badly run potentially some of the water companies
I would totally agree, and of course just the billions of litres of water we're losing every single day through the leaks, and of course that needs to be changed and rapidly. Right, let's anything else you've got? I think something else in the Sun.
Yeah, absolutely, the Sun. I think a bit of fun. Jacob Rees-Mogg, who always has a nice turn of phrase, he's writing in the Sun. He's the efficiency minister, and he's having another pop at the civil service, which he's done before and he's doing again. He doesn't like this flexi working. We know he doesn't like people who don't turn up in the office. And the latest thing is he's talking about the new body he's creating, which will cost 11 million to run, but he thinks will save 180 million pounds. This is the Public Sector Fraud Authority, and he wants to sort of get them working and really just sort of cut a swathe through the waste in Whitehall. And the headline in the Sun, as you'd expect, is "My War on Whitehall Waste and Wokeness." Only thing I would say is I do know a lot of civil servants, and this is not doing anything for civil service morale. They are quite upset about it. There are arguments for efficiency. Again, I'd probably say my war on Whitehall waste, I've been hearing this as a former political editor for 20 years. It's what ministers always say. Sometimes don't see it happening. But again, there are bigger priorities, I think, than...
Yeah, I mean, I do understand about flexible working, but I think the public really want to see civil servants doing their job in offices, and we've talked a great deal about being there face to face, and it seems that some civil servants, not all, because there are some really good ones, but it does seem some of them have had a rather lovely time.
Do absolutely nothing, don't they?
Well,
I don't need to say that.
So, and I think some work very hard. I think that the problem is that in the old days, the civil service was seen as a very good job with great pensions and the rest of it. Actually, at the moment, morale's quite low in many parts of it, and we really do need civil servants. They're not the enemy. I think there's a slight element in government. They're there to try and drive government and make things that we all want as voters to happen.
Implement government policy. They are the front runners. They're the people that are actually doing it, aren't they?
Yeah. Indeed, they are. Thank you very much indeed, Vincent.
Pleasure.
Lovely to see you. That's Vincent Moss there, former political editor at the Sunday Mirror. This is TalkTV.